Okay, colleagues, shall we make a start? Welcome everybody, I think, to our first Fire Authority meeting at the new joint headquarters here at Sherwood Lodge. Friday the 22nd of July, 10:30. We'll make a start. So the first item on our agenda is apologies for absence. Kath or Malcolm, any apologies for absence? I think Councillors
Zadrozny, Councillor Hollis, Councillor Clark and Police and Crime Commissioner Caroline Henry.
Then noted. Any other apologies? I know there are some colleagues who may have to get away part way through the meeting for personal reasons, family reasons, and that's understood and has been notified if that happens throughout the meeting. Item 2 then is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest by members or officers? I'm not seeing any indications. Item 3 then is the minutes of the annual general meeting held on the 27th of May 2022, which are in page 3 to 10, the yellow pages in our pack. Any comments or questions on the minutes? Colleagues happy that they're an appropriate and accurate reflection of the meeting if I move them? Somebody happy to second them? Yeah, Councillor Wheeler seconded them. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? They're agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, Chair's announcements. First of all, just before I come on to some of the information to share with colleagues, I just wanted to, which I know has been shared already with some members, but perhaps not all members of the Fire Authority, share the very sad news that former Councillor Vaughan Hopewell passed away sadly and unexpectedly on the 18th of June. Vaughan was a very well-respected member, I think, cross-party. He served for the Oak Tree Ward on Mansfield District Council and obviously was a county councillor as well and served alongside many colleagues here on the county council, but also served with distinction here on the Fire Authority. And certainly I think we all pass on our sympathies, condolences to Vaughan's family, friends and very close colleagues. I certainly enjoyed a really good personal relationship with him, and he always brought a really strong community spirit here with a very strong voice for his constituents, not just in his own division and ward, but right across Mansfield and across the whole county and city. And he was good fun to be around and will be very, very sadly missed. So I would suggest that we hold a minute's silence out of respect for the service that he gave and the distinction, the way in which he served here on the authority. But just before we hold a minute's silence, I wonder if any other colleagues wanted to share their thoughts. Councillor Wheeler?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's obviously devastating news right from the board. And I just remember he was on fire fighter myself for 4 years, along with himself the last time round, and he was always very eager, really enjoyed being on fire fighter. He actually was really eager about it, and happy to tell us what happened at the Human Resource Committee and great gusto. He was very proud of that, and I'd say great fun to be around. There was always a sense of humour with Vaughan and great community spirit. What he did in his community, volunteering as well as being a local councillor was exceptional, really. And our thoughts of our entire group go to his family and friends.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Any other colleagues? It's okay, we'll just pause for a minute's silence. Thank you very much, colleagues, for that. A few other items then to share with colleagues. Obviously, people will be aware of the situation we've had with the extreme heat earlier in the week, the back end of the weekend and over the beginning of the week. And it's once again highlighted the demands on the service that we deal with routinely. Sadly, some of the incidents, and I think colleagues will know this in their respective communities in both the city and the county, are suspected to be deliberate. And we have even seen situations where firefighters have been attacked, which in my own view is absolutely outrageous. Our colleagues do absolutely sterling work, and I said at the beginning of the week, having been briefed by the Chief Fire Officer, that it was nothing short of heroic, the work that was going on. Anybody just going about their daily business in the 40-degree heat, let alone having to wear the kit and the equipment that was being worn by our frontline firefighters, but also our colleagues in the control room, the joint control room. The incidents were way sky high of where we'd normally be that were being reported through, whether they were malicious reports through, whether they were genuine incidents, whether they were deliberate, or whether they'd been started as a result of the fire and the dry land that we've got, where there were fires outdoors. But I just want to, on behalf of the entire Fire Authority, and I know some colleagues have already shared their thanks directly with teams in their own divisions or areas, put on record our gratitude and thanks for the work of all of our staff for everything they continue to do for our communities. And it underlies the real importance of community engagement of the Fire Authority and of the teams that we've got in our individual areas. And I also think, and I will say this because I think it's really shameful that we've still got people in National Office who are denying issues around climate change and extreme weather. This was not a normal summer. This was not ordinary weather. Anybody walking around in that weather could tell that it wasn't. And I think our colleagues did an absolutely outstanding job. So, Craig, on behalf of the entire Fire Authority, if you could convey our thanks and gratitude for the excellent work that was done, it would be very much appreciated.
I know it to be welcome. Thank you, Chair.
In terms of the joint HQ then that we're at, I think colleagues should be aware and have been circulated that the official opening will be taking place on Thursday 28th of July. Please, if you haven't checked your emails, do have a look for the information around that's been circulated. We also now have a new incident command training suite, so resulting from the move Service HQ, a new incident command training suite will be opened at Mansfield Fire Station and will be the flagship for all of the service incident commanders, and another statement of intent to push for further service improvement at members. Welcome if they wish to attend the opening event, and will be notified as soon as the date is confirmed, so that will be circulated. The Reform White Paper, which we've made reference before, has previously been publicised to elected members, and a reminder that the consultation period closes on the 26th of July if any individual members do want to share their own views, and it can be found on the government's website, the consultation portal for the government's website, which is just the gov.uk website, so time is still available for feedback. In terms of the pay award from the NJC and the employees' response, the National Employers recently made a pay offer to the employees side of the NJC of 2%, and having had time to consult with their membership, the employees have now informed the NJC of their intention to reject the offer, which I think is unsurprising. While this may be disappointing, it's not unexpected when you see the national consistency across employee representative bodies, and I think the government made an announcement in the last few days around an offer in relation to local government workers, although I don't think any money is going to be forthcoming for councils to fund that. They're going to have to find it out of their own budgets. It's too early to say what this will mean exactly for our own service. We'll have to see where the issues get around the negotiations. However, resilience planning will clearly now occupy the time of the Chief Fire Officer and the wider leadership team for any future implications in terms of issues around pay, and I don't think the wider issues around pay in the public sector are going to go away anytime soon, or in the coming months. And then finally, just in terms of the HMI report, members are aware that the inspection the HMI did back at the end of 2021, the final report is planned for release on the 27th, and we look forward to learning the inspection, what the inspection says, and gather what we need to do from there, and hopefully there's been some improvement from the previous inspection. Are there any comments or questions in terms of Chair's announcements from colleagues? Councillor Battlemarch?
Yeah, just in relation to what you said about the national pay situation, obviously a lot of that is out of our control because it's national negotiations, and government would need to substantially increase the amount going into the pot in order for Fire Authority employers to be able to reach a decent settlement. But I think we should place on record our understanding of the firefighters' position, which is to expect firefighters to accept 2% at the moment when inflation's at 9.4 and expected to go into double figures in the next couple of months is unacceptable given the position that they do for us as an authority. And so I would hope that as the chair and as the senior officers of the Fire Authority, we would use what auspices we can to try and encourage the government to put more money in into to properly open up negotiations, because what we don't want is a situation where firefighters are forced to take industrial action, because that will be a retrograde step. Obviously, I'm sure they don't want to do it, and I'm sure we wouldn't want it to happen. But you know, the cost of living is shocking at the moment, and something's got to be done.
Thank you, Councillor Rothermuch. Chief will speak for himself. I know there have been conversations through the National Fire Chiefs Council, but just yesterday and the day before I was in London and impressing that exact point on the interim Secretaries of State who are in post at the moment. And to be fair to the interim Secretary of State for the Department for Local Government, which obviously has some responsibility for the fire service, as well as obviously still elements retained within the Home Office, the interim Secretary of State, although there'll be a new Prime Minister in September, did reflect that they understand the point around the frustration around pay issues, and it was very clear that they will be advising the incoming Prime Minister that something has got to be done about this. This situation can't be ignored. And to be fair, you know, particularly you can understand why trade representatives and colleagues who work in the fire service will be frustrated with the current offer that is on the table, because already, notwithstanding the debate people might want to have about where their views are about who funds any pay offer, that offer is out of kilter with the offer that's being made for local government staff. So you can absolutely, before you even get into a debate about the issue, understand why there's a frustration about a lack of parity. So I'll continue to make the case, you know, wherever I get the opportunity to, Steve. But ultimately, as you said, this is employers, the employees, the government have got to come around the table and find a way forward on this that is suitable and that recognises, as you said, the acute pressures that are on people that are doing a really important job for us. And I mean, this weekend just highlights it, doesn't it? But they're doing it every single day, you know, throughout the year. Councillor Copley, and then Councillor Lee, and then Councillor Wheeler.
Have the Firefighters Union actually come back and said where their indications are, where they think the suitable pay rise would be?
Well, there's an ongoing conversation, isn't there, and discussion, and I'm not here to speak. I'm not here to speak for the FBU or trade representatives. An ongoing discussion at NJC level, and I think that made it very, very clear that they're not satisfied with the offer that's on the table. Councillor Lee?
Chairman, appreciate it, thank you very much. I was in the military the last time these strikes happened. I didn't take part, but I was on cover to take part. The military are no longer able, in my opinion, to do the job that they did many years ago. If strikes were to happen, and God forbid they were to happen, I think major life could be at risk, because we just haven't got the capability that we once had. We've had 20 years of being in Afghan and Iraq since then. We've had major conflicts. We've got Ukraine. We've got more troops on the borders with Ukraine, trying to keep peace over there and to stop the Russians advancing. And we just haven't got that capability. So I'm hoping that the government and the fire authority can come together, because I don't know what the plan would be to cover that, but it won't be the military, I can tell you now.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Chief? Yeah, just on that one, Councillor. I suppose really, ultimately, if the nation is in trouble in terms of the civil side of things, there is still an ability to put requests in for military assistance. Now, that's normally through things like LRF, where there's wide-scale flooding, and you'll usually see things where troops are put on the ground. You know, how effective that is or not in terms of what they add to it, but there is a role there. For many years now, it's been the role really that you're not to rely on, as authorities rely on military assistance. The Green Goddesses of, you know, yesteryear, they just do not exist anymore, and they were sold off by the military. So any facilities that are used are provided by the fire authority or third-party providers. And it's now been a responsibility for many years for the authority to provide business continuity arrangements should the workforce withdraw its labour. All I can say, having had experience of going through a number of strikes, it's a significantly reduced capability, What I can say about the feedback to Councillor Copley about the number, I'm not picking up anything locally about what they think is the right figure, and it's certainly not for my job. We're certainly lobbying, as the Chair said, through National Fire Chiefs Council about what our workforces are saying to us. I'm doing 3 or 4 visits to different teams a week at least at the minute about what they are saying. They are being very, very clear with me about where they stand after many, many years of how they feel So I can only relay to you about what your workforce as an authority, what they feel at the minute. And they are feeling very, very undervalued. And I have to lead that and I have to kind of share that with you as the Chief Forester and leader of the organisation.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Wheeler and then Councillor Ray.
Yeah, thank you. I think, well, I'd like just to say myself with your comments about the work of our heroic teams out in the field this week. I think, I've seen some of the pictures on there. I think it wasn't particularly bad in my division, but looking at, especially around with Sherwood Forest, Sherwood Pines, the amount of devastation there. I know with Bidwell as well, my colleague over there who I was speaking to about there, so, you know, absolutely full of praise for the team there, and also to part thanks to members of the community who were coming out with, I know, water and snacks. Some of it is really great to see that community spirit, and I'm sure we show our thanks for those who were there to help. And I mean, the attacks on our team, we've got to absolutely come out with them. As Sean's possible to tell them, hopefully that our colleagues in the police will take that absolutely seriously, as should anyone else, to find the perpetrators and take them to swift action. We can't allow that to ever happen.
Yeah,
to our team.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Well said. Councillor Ray.
Yeah, just a couple of people said and what the Chief has said there. I mean, I'm concerned about staff morale. I mean, I think 2% is disrespectful. I think it's, you know, we're not supposed to make political statements, but the clapping we had under COVID and the situation the force has gone through now, and to be offered that is just disrespectful. And I'm not surprised people are feeling undervalued. I'm concerned about the funding because in other sectors, I work in the education sector, that there's been a below inflation pay rise. That's not been funded, so that's going to come out of school budgets, which are already, you know, with inflation, etc., very tight. I think we need to have a word about how that's going to affect our workforce. On the comments on industrial action, obviously I struggle with this in terms of we want to maintain a service to keep people safe. I do not agree with people coming in any description whatsoever when people are taking industrial action. I think that's counterproductive. I think it's wrong. I think it's immoral. I don't agree with strike breaking. I think it makes industrial relations worse, you know, certainly with our staff. So let's hope it doesn't come to that. But I do think we have a role to say that it needs to be properly funded. We could have issues, we already have issues with recruitment, apart from the fairness issue in certain sectors. And 2% when inflation's at 9% is a 7% pay cut for our workforce, who, in my opinion, some of which are already underpaid anyway. So I do think we need to say to the government in the strongest terms, they need to get this sorted out. And similarly, you know, I've mentioned before tax burden, so I won't go on about it on length, but we've got a tax burden on working people as high as it's been for 70 years. And, you know, our staff have been hit with national insurance and all sorts of stuff. So I do think, you know, we need to say this in strong terms. And I'm sorry to hear with the Chief that some of our staff feel undervalued, but I don't blame us because, as I say, I think that's a disrespectful offer.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Okay, I'm going to move on from Chair's announcements to committee membership. Malcolm, are you introducing this report?
It's just a couple of quick changes, actually, as requested by Councillor Wheeler as leader of the Conservative group. They are noted on the report, and if we could just agree those, please.
Any comments or questions? Straightforward, so the recommendations are there on the front of the report. Councillor Lee Cubley replaces Councillor Jonathan Wheeler on the HR committee, and Councillor Jonathan Wheeler replaces Councillor Eddie Cubley on the personnel committee. So move those recommendations, seconded by Councillor Wheeler. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? They are agreed unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 6 then is our annual governance statement 2021-22, and I think this is going to be introduced by Becky.
So I would normally bring this report alongside the statement of accounts, but with the delays in the external audit, I think if we delay it till that time, it will be not a timely paper and sort of not worth the paper it's written on. So I'll make a decision to bring it a bit earlier for you this year. For the purpose of the report, it is a statutory requirement to set out how we've complied with our local code of corporate governance, and the purpose is to demonstrate that the governance arrangements that we have in place are fit for purpose. So there is the statement is attached on Appendix A for your information. Section 3 just sets out the governance arrangements, which are very similar to the report that you saw for the 2021 annual governance statements back in February. And Section 4 provides an analysis of the effectiveness of those arrangements. So there have been a few developments in the year, really. We've obviously business continuity in Section 4.12 shows that we're continuing to develop following COVID. probably will continue to develop further in this year following this week's extreme heat as well, as demonstrated areas that we can review our business continuity arrangements. Budget monitoring and efficiency in 4.18 is demonstrating the response with the efficiency strategy going forward, the Future 25, a response to our worsening financial position, and the adoption of the financial management code during last financial year as well. And probably the area for you to read that provides the best information on internal audit on 4.26, because this is an external analysis of our governance arrangements from our internal auditors. Finance and Resources Committee received the audit annual report for 21-22 back in June, where they concluded that that they could provide substantial assurance regarding the adequacy and effectiveness of the corporate governance and risk management frameworks. That's in 4.34. So that's quite important, because obviously we can write our own measure ourselves against how we feel that we meet the standards, but to have that external review is really important. And you also received the audit report from the external auditors. I know that related back to 2021, but they were reviewing our governance arrangements right up to the date of when we considered their report at your last meeting. So to conclude on section 6, we've concluded that the authority has well developed and evolving governance arrangements in place that are fit for purpose. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Any questions for Becky? Alan?
Yeah, so thank you very much for the report. Without belabouring the point we previously on, budget from February seems like an age away. So much has changed since, and I think we just need to always bear in mind that we've got to keep at it. We've got to keep examining what originally was budgeting for 3%. We've got to keep a very close eye on these things, as well as staff vacancies, things like that. I suppose the only additional point would be 5.8. I think there's a bit of a spelling error.
Oh, dear.
But aside from that, thank you very much.
Okay.
We get that tidied up.
Yes, my apologies.
So,
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Any other comments or questions? Recommendations are then that members approve the annual governance statement 2021-22, so I'll move the recommendation. People happy to agree? They agree. Thank you very much. Item 7 then is the annual statement of assurance, page 33 to 74 in our pack, and I think this is going to be introduced by Becky as well. No?
Sorry, Chair, this one's actually candidate.
Candidate.
Yeah. Yep, this sits nicely alongside the preceding report, and it's a pleasure to bring this annual statement of assurance for 2021-22 to members this morning for approval for us to publish. So it's a requirement of fire authorities and fire rescue services through the national framework that we regularly report on to give assurance that we're meeting the expectations of our integrated risk management plan. And this report not only summarises the achievements of the year 2021-22, but also the whole 3-year period of our strategic plan, which concluded at the end of March this year. The idea is it's there to give assurance not only to the authority but to the public on performance around the key delivery areas. And because we have this new website, which is extremely accessible now to the public in all sorts of ways, it will be hosted there, and that makes it very accessible. If you go to 2.5 in the report, we've summarised the key achievements over the past year to give public confidence. And I think rather than running through each of them, what I would say is that there's an overriding, at least holding steady, but in the main improvement across all of the factors that are listed here. And also, we have now reached a point where, on the whole, productivity is back to pre-COVID levels, which is also something that we're glad about. Alongside this, we've also received recognition over the past year in a range of different ways, and we've highlighted here just these three that were around the work that the service did across the pandemic time, working across a range of different services and supporting in lots of different ways. But in particular, we were recognised for the work we did to support EMAS through that period. We also had a very positive Ofsted report in April last year regarding our trainee and apprenticeship scheme, so that was very positive. We've subsequently had a follow-up Ofsted, and the results of that will come forward in due course. And we were recognised as being in the Stonewall Top 100 employers. 2.8 summarises the 3 years of progress, and again, rather than go through all of those, what I would suggest is to go to page 5 of the actual appendix, and between pages 5 and 10, what members will find are really easy to access infographics which summarise all of these various different activities, and it's the kind of thing I would say, carry this around in your wallets if you want to say something positive about the work that's going on across Notts Fire and Rescue. This summarises it. But also, subsequent to that within the report is all sorts of detail which is useful for getting into more detail and understanding the context and the performance. And I think, Chair, I would probably pause there and see if there are any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Candida, and certainly an awful lot for the service to be proud of, not just in the previous year, but over the period, and I think some fantastic facts and figures, that we need to amplify as leaders in our community to let people know the broad breadth of work that's going on by the Fire and Rescue Service. So, and actually, I think it's a really nice report as well, easy to read, easy to digest, and from a presentation perspective, so well done to be involved, not only in the work, but also the way in which it's been presented. Councillor Quigley.
Just a point about consistency on page 5 of the report. We've set figures out saying what's increased and decreased, but we don't say anything about fires. There's no figure there that says it's up or down, and there was no figure about rescues, whereas the others have all got percentage increases against them. So just to be consistent, it would be nice if those two items were covered in the same way.
Brilliant. We'll take on board that feedback.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Quigley. Councillor Ray.
Yeah, I can see the point there. The only concern I've got with some of the figures would be obviously under COVID, it's going to skew things completely, isn't it? So it's going to look like false alarms and other things are up sky high, because obviously under COVID we didn't have as many incidents of a certain nature. Some things you may well have done, but when people working from home, well, there was less business, etc., obviously it's going to skew things, isn't it? So I don't know what we do about that, to be honest.
I suppose we'll deal with that through CS committee, Councillor, in terms of like quarterly reports, so you get a picture that compares to previous periods. So obviously delegated through your CS committee, that will kind of be picked up to give that committee a truer picture, and if there are any bigger issues through committee outcomes, or otherwise bringing it into full fire authority.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Candida.
Sorry, just for clarity, absolutely take your point about how that's captured in the infographic, but in terms of the figures, they are there in the report showing.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Who's going to, in the public, when it's out in the public domain, they're just going to go reading through the report.
No, it's a good
just
point.
to be consistent.
We can get that rectified online.
Councillor Wheeler.
Let me just say what's good about the report. I was looking at the report, but I think mainly showing that there's more to the fire service than just what we might perceive as the data. I mean, especially you know what around COVID and the shelter community, but essentially we should be always pushing that to people aware exactly what we do. I think the argument is probably the way to think that what we do is fighting fires, but actually there's a lot more sense we should be. I mean, for our community strategy, we probably find that a lot more.
I can take that on board, Councillor. One of my sort of challenges really is to try and make people understand we're not fire brigades anymore.
Yeah.
We're not a fire brigade, and it's so much more than putting a fire out. When you look at the statistics about what we actually do, a small percentage putting fires out, a large percentage getting ready to put those fires out and do many other things on behalf of communities. So,
Yeah,
thank
I think
you.
it also shows the public perception, because a lot of people might say, well, the amount of fires are going down, why So as a bowl, we do a lot more for communities. That's why we're still here. We still absolutely need it critical more than ever. So.
And
Yeah,
I think
support.
something that's prompted me one your comment there as well to bring back is through the National Fire Chiefs Council and Nottingham Trent University actually, they've done some work around return on investment. So what is the value of doing a safe and well visit to somebody's home for every pound that you spend? And that's probably something that's prompted me to kind of bring that back and give members a kind of a broader view of the benefit that we bring.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Thank you, Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's already been said, and I'd actually just like to give a special shout out to the fire service who attended Workshop Pride. It was very well attended, a great event, as Sybil will know, and I think it really showed the fire service at its best, showing in the community, speaking with residents, and really proving the point that it's not just about fires, it's about the service that's being provided. So a big shout out there. I don't want to nitpick, but I just want to ask because I'm genuinely very curious. So page 49, there is I'll let everyone just turn to it. There's a point regarding the collaboration to improve community outcomes. So I think it's page 11 on the assurance itself, annual assurance statement. It mentions cooperation with the University of Nottingham Trent about working with experts to evaluate our activities. I was just genuinely curious on how that's going and what that involves. I suppose to ask another question in terms of the cadet scheme. Just wondering, because it mentions it's paused, is that going to be a forever pause, or is it, other ideas forming about how we're going to be working with that?
I suppose on the Trent University, the one thing we did have a good report on was around the how we're conducting safe and well visits in people's homes, and that came back, and I think there's 2 or 3 things that were reported to Community Safety Committee about that report. But it basically said our Charlie P profile that members will be aware, it's hitting the mark, we're getting the right people with the right vulnerabilities, so that was really, really good. HMI have also raised the issue of that evaluation of activities as about being far further, and you'll probably see something when that comes back to authority about the need to do more about evaluation, and the wider leadership team are actually discussing that very point yesterday. Trent University at the moment we've just agreed, I think, 4 key areas of activity for evaluation around how we're doing our work, and that will include collaborations with others as well. I think HMI even picked up about an evaluation process about how this move to here has gone. Well, it is still ongoing. I think members will be, you'll be experiencing that yourself, but it's still an ongoing issue that we'll come back to. But it'll be things like prevention that we'll look at, councils and protection. So some of those front-end things that we're doing on behalf of communities and with our partners.
So they essentially assessing what we're doing in terms of how it's working out.
Yeah, we'll work a kind of a scope of criteria about what we want them to look at, and then they'll put some academic rigour to what's the best model to use for that, and then give us a report back. A little bit playing into what I said to Councillor Wheeler about the return on investment that's been by Trent University on the wider fire sector in the UK. And I think those 2 things coming together, the work we're doing locally and what nationally we're doing with Trent University, I think will be useful for members to see, to give you some more context.
Yeah, I think that's definitely useful, some sort of expert advice that comes in as a look, see what's happening nationally, what the fire services are using. Yeah.
And your point was on the cadet scheme.
Yes, yeah.
That was briefly discussed yesterday, and that's basically the ongoing discussions around finances.
Yeah.
Really, and the decisions we're making, you'll see that come back through the Futures 25 programme work and the update reports. And I suppose as a plug for me, there's a member seminar on the 6th of September, where we'll try and give you some methodology about what ground we've covered so far and where we think we're at as a service. And of course, Becky will sort of say as well is that we don't know what money we're going to get, but we've managed to deal with, mainly through naturally occurring vacancies, I have to say, and other things. We've done the in-year things about 1.7 million, but we're still on the planning scenario of 2 million plus substantive savings for next year. So it'll play into there, and of course we have to base it on your statutory duties as a fire authority, and then those other things that we can do that we think add value to communities. So we're having to make some decisions that, on the face of it, when you look at it, it's a real shame, but I think we have to be very, very pragmatic about what risk we face.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey, and thank you for your feedback about Workshop Pride. And just to note to elected members, a helpful prompt, Councillor Bailey, that the fire service will be, as it always is, at Nottinghamshire Pride on Saturday the 30th of July, and elected members will be most welcome for the event down there in the city, and we'll make sure that information is circulated early next week or before the end of this week about that, to make sure that members know the details, and if if you want to come along and join in with staff representatives who will be at the event, please do so. So thank you for your feedback from yourself and Councillor Fielding about that, Councillor Bailey. Any other comments or questions? The recommendation then is that we approve the annual statement of assurance. Move the recommendation. Colleagues have to agree? Agreed. Agreed. Item 8 then is the closure of the areas for improvement from the 2019 HMI CFRS inspection. The candidate is going to introduce this report.
So this is a report for completion. Members will recall that we had 24 areas for improvement in our last inspection, and over the period of the past 3 years we've been busily working away on those, reporting them through their respective relevant committees, and have reached the point where we will now seek approval for the full closure of all of those areas for improvement, just in time for our new inspection report to be released. I don't think it particularly warrants any more description, Chair.
Thank you, candidate. Straightforward report. I mean, I think the thing to say here is congratulations to everybody across the service, but also just I want to put on record my thanks to elected members for the scrutiny and accountability they've applied. I think this has worked really well from an operational and managerial service perspective, but also from a governance perspective. Elected members holding to account, pushing, challenging around the areas for improvement, and I think it all just demonstrates the right direction of travel for the service, which, as I say, hopefully is reflected in the new inspection. So congratulations to everybody and to members of the authority. Any comments on this, Councillor Wheeler?
I think just to, again, it's really good to see that this is now finally able to close after 3 years. I mean, I remember on the authority at the time when we got the report through, it was quite shocking at the time to see the amount of areas we had, but I think what's always important is how you respond to that at this point and how you get on to fix those areas. So really glad that we're at the point where it was closed out and we've completely taken board the recommendation to close out the advices on the officers that is where we need to be. And hopefully, I think just to bear that in mind on the next report, if there are any areas, so hopefully a lot less for the report that comes out this week, that we just keep in that same vein of scrutiny that we've had before, and to really push on the actions as soon as possible so we can get that confidence out there, especially in the current circumstances, that we take that on board and get to where we need to be.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. I agree with that. I'm going to read the recommendation then. I can't see any other indications. Members approve the closure of the areas for improvement from the 2019 HMI CFRS inspection. So I'll move the recommendation. Does that to agree? Agreed. Disagreed. Thank you very much. Item 9 then is our statement of pay policy, and I think Candida's going to introduce it. So you're going to do
I'm
this,
going to have a go this time.
Yeah, you're on, Chief.
I'm going to have a go. Thank you, Chair. Members, the background talks about Localism Act, about why this was brought in, about pay differentials, gender pay gaps, and we obviously bring back occasionally a gender pay gap report. Anyway, there's an appendix attached to it with lots of information, and I'm sure you're going to be really pleased. I'm going to leave that to you to take your leisure over the appendix, because 2.12 actually points out a lot of the main points that we wanted to lift from it that we think is most relevant and give you a flavour of what's in the report. It has to be considered by a full fire authority. That is part of the results. It can't be delegated to a subcommittee, and that's why we bring it here today as part of the annual process of assurance with yourselves. Pay policy then in 21-22, if I move to 2.12, the main changes around reference to gender pay gap reporting outcomes, which were introduced from 2017, and you can see there, members, that in the first bullet point there's a median pay of 8.2% difference. And again, to give some kind of context, the fire rescue service is very male dominated still, and particularly because of the way that we are structured around single tier entry through the uniformed side, that obviously then cuts down. If we're not recruiting more female firefighters, for example, then they're less progress on to be more senior roles. You'll clearly, it's visible to see this morning, we've clearly got Candida as our Assistant Chief Officer, and we've got Becky as one of the strategic leadership teams, as one of our strategic leaders as well. So the service and the authority have done quite a bit at a senior level to try and project that kind of visibility about there are differences and changes being made. So that is good, but there's much, much more to do. Pay information around relating to mean average, and the mean average now standing at just over £35,000. And again, that that doesn't reflect if I put that in context of firefighters, that's about £30,000 salary for a fully competent firefighter after a couple of years. They start on about £22,000, £23,000, so relevant to kind of the context for this morning's discussions. So, but the mean average around just over £35,000. Confirmation of annual pay awards applied that contained in the appendix from 2021. Again, we're now beginning to talk about this year's. National rates of pay for chief officers that are in there, and that's been reviewed and is benchmarked. You benchmark that with the assistance of the treasurer and the clerk to make sure you're actually doing what you think you should be doing around your chief officers that you appoint to the authority. Update on the cost of the corporate healthcare scheme. A point I would make about this, we did consider this as one of the cost saving because the authority does allocate some of its budget around the healthcare scheme. My view and my recommendation will always be is make sure that is one of the benefits that members of the service have when they need physiotherapy, optical support or counselling support. It adds to our wellbeing strategy, and it's certainly my view that wherever we can we will maintain that, because particularly through these challenging times staff need all the support they can get. So that's on that one. There's been no compensation payments agreed through the 21 and 22 period, and there were 2 settlement payments made through that same period, and they've obviously been dealt with confidentially, and they'll have been reported through things like HR committee or Finance and Resources committee where it's relevant to do so. And on the page 82 at the top, the last bullet point, there's no instances of early payment of pension payments to your local government pension scheme as a result of a compulsory redundancy. And again, when we bring back Futures 25, I don't want to set the hairs running, but all those kind of things in terms of vacancies, redundancies and changes to the service will be considered. And again, next year retrospectively, we'll pick up all of that where they have been appropriate to report through the pay policy. And the bullet points I want to cover, Chair. If there are any questions from members.
Thank you, Chief. Any comments or questions? Councillor Ray.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, I made some comments about pay before. Thanks to this report, it's detailed under the Localism Act. I mean, it's interesting, obviously, looking at it from an outsider's point of view. When you look at this, obviously, as the Chief said, mean average pays can get distorted quite heavily, can't it? When we're actually looking at some of the jobs. In terms of you saying a firefighter on 22,000, and often it's quoted, when you look at a service as a mean average, people assume that the vast majority of workers receive that. So I think, as the Chief said, we should emphasise that the vast majority of our staff aren't necessarily on that. In terms of the gender pay gap, obviously there is quite a big gap there, and the Chief's alluded to, obviously, things have been done in terms of representation. I'm just wondering, often that happens because at the not just at the top, but how we're recruiting the bottom. When I go into the canteen or some of the lower paid roles, what's the representation like there? I'm not trying to be stereotypical, but from walking around we can see that. And it would be good sometimes to see what the lowest pay is we're doing in terms of how that fits in with the living wage, and how, because that's my concern, not just in the top. How much are we paying people a decent and fair figure, for example? Are we a living wage employer? I was thinking, actually, I don't know that. And then, sorry for a lot of questions on that. Obviously, you mentioned 2 settlement payments. Obviously, they're confidential. We don't know the amounts of those payments. I don't know if we could. I don't mean specifically to individuals, obviously, but that was missing. So those were just a few thoughts I had.
The settlement payments, I believe, are entered into the financial reporting around. There'll be a line in the budget somewhere. I know that seems a bit flippant, but it will be reported. We can always take away about what we feel, or members feel in terms of feedback about what detail they require, maintaining the confidentiality where they're appropriate around those. I suppose on the, yes, in terms of living wage and national wage, we did commit to doing that some years ago.
2016.
Some years ago now. So we do that. And I think that affected, I think it was band 1 we had at the time. I don't think we've got any band 1 or anything now, but again, I will be held to account on that. Around the recruitment side, through the last recruitment, and we've got positive action ongoing now around whole-time recruitment. The issue for that, though, is that people always talk about positive action about whole-time recruitment. Most of our fire appliances aren't whole-time. Most of the majority, so it can skew the figures, I guess, as well, are on-call. So we need to do some positive action on making sure that on-call fire appliances are also attracting the right people. There's also some work around through the National Fire Chiefs Council around direct entry as well, ongoing at the moment. And that target's really uniformed, being at station manager and area manager levels about direct entry. And there have been some services that have indicated they want to be part of the first tranche of that. I've decided on this occasion not to do the first tranche of that because I think we've got too much to stretch ourselves to deal with that at the moment. But it is definitely something I have an appetite for in the future when I feel it's appropriate to do that and bring back to members.
Can I come back and say one thing? The other thing I thought, and again, I don't know if it's outside the remit of this, in terms of recruitment and pay. We talk about gender, we don't talk about race, and obviously that's an issue for a number of organisations, and where we have colleagues. And obviously, come from a city, it's quite diverse. Are we reflecting that, and do we look into that as a criteria where people are paid?
We absolutely do, and I suppose one of the good things that's really happened over the last 18 months or so is things like staff networks that are growing internally. So things like, Ethnic Minority Alliance that we have, but also that's teeing us into the Bain Community Advisory Group that we've set up as well. So we've now got a community advisory group about helping us about what we could do better about getting into some of those communities. And that's now beginning to spill over a little bit in the early days about our prevention and protection work. Because I think when a firefighter or a fire protection officer goes to a certain place, they also need to be thinking about projecting the organisation from a positive action perspective. So we could be an employer of choice. So we just need people to, I suppose, dial their antennas in. But yes, in terms of you about representation more broadly, Councillor, we are absolutely doing that.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Councillor Eaton.
Thank you. I was going to pick up on the gender pay gap issue because I do notice that from the pay policy to the summary, we've moved the median average of 8.2, but actually our mean average is 15.3, which actually very much tells me that there's a lot of low-paid women in the organisation. There is the issue of bringing women through into managerial positions, but there's also the issue of a lot of people earning less being majority female.
If I look at support services, there are quite a number of women who are in supervisory positions, but that's skewed by the numbers of those positions relative to the size of the organisation. So if I look at middle managers, all of the flexible duty station managers, group managers and area managers are men. So that's 30-something of those that are there. Not one woman is in that cohort, and they are of the higher paid band in there. So that is an absolute issue to us, and I accept it's a little bit like skewing the figures. I think Councillor Rain said earlier about another issue. It is there, but it's not lost on us at all. We're not trying to purposely manipulate or manoeuvre. We're very obvious about it ourselves as well, Councillor, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eaton. Anybody else? No? The recommendation is then that members approve the statement of pay policy attached at Appendix A, which the Chief's referenced and we've had a good discussion about. I'll move the recommendation. People happy to agree? Agree. Thank you very much. Item 10 then is constitutional update, which is a report of the clerk and monitoring officer. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. Essentially, this report falls into a number of different elements. The first thing I wanted to do was to give you an update on the work that's currently being undertaken by the Independent Remuneration Panel. Members who were on the authority back in December last year may recall that I brought forward a report from that panel on an interim basis pending completion of their further work on members' allowances and associated issues. Unfortunately, due to a number of circumstances, they haven't yet been able to conclude that work, but I'm hopeful that a further report on this will be brought to the September meeting for your consideration. The second issue in relation to this report is to explain to you what we're actually doing, and it's very much around our overarching governance framework to make sure it's fit for purpose and is kept up to date. And there will be, from time to time, different reports covering different aspects of our governance documentation. And the intention is that as each and every one is completed and approved, it will be put on our new website so that we have total transparency to the public as to how we make decisions, where delegations sit, and how accountability is reached. So turning now to the specifics of this particular report, it actually addresses the scheme of delegation and you will see Appendix 1, there is a clean copy and also a track change copy of the suggested changes that I'm putting forward in consultation and conjunction with the Chief Fire Officer. Some of them are elements of tidying up. Other elements which I would draw to your attention in particular are, for example, on page 62, I've increased the level for ex gratia payments in Roman numeral 4 from what was £250 to £1,000. And in relation to page 63, you will also see there is a further increase in level of delegation from what was £15,000 to £25,000. In essence, these figures haven't been looked at for probably 15 years or more, and I'm inflating them really to just bring them in line with updated figures which I consider to be appropriate, but obviously are for your consideration. Other delegations I would draw to your attention on page 60 of the scheme of delegation, which is the first page of the track change one. At 1D, and the Chief Fire Officer will also speak to this in due course, I am proposing a further amendment. So it asks that the Chief Fire Officer shall be empowered to appoint, establish, etc. But I'm also suggesting that we incorporate after the word empowered in consultation with the Chair of the Authority. And similarly, in relation to the final page of the track change document, I would also say that where I ask for a delegation to the Chief Fire Officer, that also is in consultation with the Chair of the Authority. So it gives member oversight as to proposals that are being put forward by the Chief Fire Officer. In other regards, as I've said before, it's updating and including new acts such as the Building Safety Act to ensure that the Chief Fire Officer has the appropriate powers to take action as necessary. But otherwise, I think I'll now hand over to the Chief Fire Officer to just explain further on item 1D.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you. I suppose with the consultation, this has been an ongoing discussion that the previous Chief Fire Officer and I were having as well, and a couple of members. I'm not sure if it was directly with the Chair, with the Chief, obviously. This was about actually a bit more flexibility and a bit more kind of like putting probably the onus and the accountability where we felt it need to be. So, give you an example, if we wanted to disestablish a post, say at £21,000, that would have needed a business case for consideration in strategic leadership team. That would have then needed to wait for the next HR committee, for the HR committee to support any recommendations or not in HR committee. That then would have gone to full fire authority to decide whether we could have established, varied that post or otherwise for something that may be around £21,000. And that we feel that that delay is actually, particularly now when we think about the labour market and everything else and the ability to get access to labour, is actually been brought more into light as well. So that gives us a bit more flexibility. The bit in there as well is that it also still builds in the ability for member scrutiny with the consultation with the Chair about any future and proposed ones. Large scale things that we may see, large scale, when I talk about large scale about relative to this organisation, would still have to come to things like policy and strategy, F&R committee where there are demands, or HR committee, so that members will still have oversight and scrutiny at a number of levels, including full fire authority level. But within the pay budget, I think that's the reassurance I'd like to give, is within the pay budget I can actually do what I feel is needed to do and advise members to make sure we can run the organisation successfully and be as flexible as we can and provide members that reassurance and confidence that you have the oversight and scrutiny of me. And certainly something the Chair has had a conversation with me about is making sure we get that consultation and making sure that it's okay with the Chief Fire Officer you might have or trust now, and hopefully you do, but things change and people change and we need to make sure we build that in. And the thing I'd like to provide as well is that this may cause some concern to things like representative bodies and everything else about we can just do what we like. We have no intention of doing just what we like, and there are things in place that stop us doing that as well. And we have a really good relationship still with our local representatives, and it's my intention that relationship must continue, particularly over the next few months as we head into some difficult times.
Thank you.
Happy to
Chair.
take questions, Chair.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Cubley, then Councillor Lee, then Councillor Quigley, then Councillor Ray. Councillor
On
Cubley.
page 62, firefighters' pensions, it just says the chief fire officer may exercise the fire and rescue authority's discretionary powers. Can we have more detail on what those discretionary powers are?
Well, I suppose really, I'm going to pass that over to your delegated scheme manager, which is Becky's Treasury.
Yes, thank you. We do have a number of delegated powers. So where the firefighters' pension scheme is not set, and it is up to us to decide. So it's things like abatement of pensions and other such things. They have been approved by Fire Authority in the past, and we are looking at reviewing them actually at the moment, because some of their guidance around them from the LGA has changed. So I would say that we would still be taking those to Finance and Resources Committee at least to approve if we're going to change them. But there may be instances where we would want to look in the interim. For example, we have blanket. Sometimes we have blanket discretions in place. So at the moment, abatement is a good one in that we can abate pensions. We don't abate pensions. That's it's approved by Fire Authority. It's a blanket decision. But now we're being told we should be reviewing each case as it comes. So if we do that, we wouldn't have the timely manner to bring it back to Fire Authority to approve each single case. So we will be reviewing those to bring a template of how we will make those decisions rather than a blanket yes or no. So that's why we need a little bit more discretion underneath in that those cases will be now heard individually.
Thank you. Happy, Councillor Cubley? Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Lee?
Hi, Chairman. I can't support this, and it's for the simple reason that it came to us 5 minutes before the meeting, and the email was sent out at 10:30 at the start of the meeting. For something this important, where we are looking at changing quite large, significant amounts of money over a period of time, and this is quite an important report, I think it should come back to the next meeting really and give us time to go over it. We're still hearing changes on the day of the meeting. To me, it feels like this wasn't completed until late last night. I hope that's not the case, but it feels like it was. And I think it's not right really. We should be given 7 days to look over these really at the latest. And it all should come together. So I'm not happy.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Quigley?
It's really the same issue, and I would never take a report to a meeting like this because it's bad procedurally and it's bad governance to actually table important reports on the day. But also looking at the actual report itself, I've not had a chance to look at it properly, but there are two 1.3s on the background, so obviously it's not been fully scrutinised before it's been presented to this meeting, and I think, as I've always insisted in any role I've had, is that if we don't receive a report 7 days before the meeting, we don't table it.
Thank you, Councillor Quigley. Councillor Ray?
Yeah, I can't actually see what Councillor and Councillor Quigley is saying there in terms of timing. I mean, I've got fewer reserves about it because I'm looking at, and to be honest, obviously this is updating what is fairly an archaic policy scheme, because I mean I've not heard anything. The person I referred to, I used to prefer that term for years. I mean, and when you look at the figures, obviously with inflation, it's difficult, isn't it? Because obviously we're looking at it in some of the facts and figures, and we don't want, this is obviously it was a very outdated document for one reason or another. We want to give the chief as much operational discretion as we possibly can, and we don't want to excessive bureaucracy, etc. Has been described. Some of the policies are not good and it wastes money. So I mean, I'm happy looking at it with the contents of it. But I can see, to be fair, what Councillor Quigley is saying in terms of principle when you get this. I don't know if this has been down to the workload of officers, which can be extremely heavy at the moment, for example. So I don't want to criticise anyone, but I can see where they're coming from on it. In terms of some of the other points I wanted to make, in terms of the payments, for example, the claims against the authority, etc., just out of interest, obviously, when you're talking about large amounts of public money, they'd be subsequently reported to Fire Authority, wouldn't they, in terms of the nature of them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay. That was a concern for me.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, just summarise the points that two members of my group already made. I'm not saying principle against the document at all, but like I said, when you've not had much time to scrutinise it properly, we talk about in the first 1.3 about transparency, and that the members of the public have not had a chance to see this before we come to vote on it, and when there is actually quite a bit of changes, and again, not saying anything against them in principle about the extra discretion of the Chief Fire Officer, but again, we've got to make sure we are fully transparent on this. So, because we don't want a position where we're here to vote this down, we actually propose that we defer this to September, as always been mentioned by Councillor Lee, just to give everyone enough time to go through it in detail, to let, again, members of the public to see this in detail on the website, as well as any comments come back, give time just to tidy up the wording, the points that some people already raised on a few of the programme issues. So again, fully appreciate this, not against any officer in particular at all, because again, I know they workload, especially with some of the dual arrangements with the city and what we've had going on there recently. So I think it's really important that we just make sure this is, we're completely transparent and not open to criticism coming back that we try to rush this through, and in any particular sense, if this isn't needed before September for any operational reasons to bring this forward now, I think that's all we're concerned to bring this back to September.
Thank you, Councillor Wheeler. Any other comments or questions? Chief Clerk, have you anything to say at this stage?
I suppose really, points noted from councillors, and no apologies for that, but lots of reasons why we'll be where we will be. I suppose that detail doesn't necessarily matter, but our apologies on that. I suppose on some of the establishment things, I probably need a conversation with the clerk about what issues that might cause us through the summer, some of the changes we might need to get on with, because we've always been trying to get it here for many, many months, but for lots of reasons that we've not been able to. But I guess that's all I'd kind of say, really, Madam Chair.
Right. So, I mean, there's a couple of issues for me here. Yeah, okay, accept the point about there's a report landing here that people have only had a chance to read, and apologies for that. I haven't heard in the debate thus far and in the points that have been raised any substantial concern people have got about the alterations. Well, no, I accept that point. About the substantive point about the alterations that have been made. We've been walked through the substantive changes by the clerk, which is the same for all elected members. We employ a clerk as an independent person to give us that advice, and I think we should trust that advice. In essence, the way I read this, and I think it's purely transparent, is we are updating our scheme of delegation to reflect relevant legislation. I don't know why we disagree with that, and I don't know what deferring that until September would do, because the legislation isn't going to change between now and September. I accept your point, Councillor Lee, about an uplift in figures, but I think it's slightly exaggerative to say that they are significant sums of public money. It isn't. I mean, they're an uplift. This happens all the time at all sorts of authorities, and I think, as the clerk has already referenced, there haven't been uplifts for significant numbers of years, so I wouldn't have a concern about that. I think the one area where we ought to be focusing our attention, and where people might have, perhaps concern isn't the right word, but rise to questions, which is why I've suggested that there's an in consultation with the chair, is the slight degree of increased flexibility we're giving to the Chief Fire Officer around staffing structures and establishment and disestablishment of posts. And just to be absolutely crystal clear with people, that is still establishment and disestablishment of posts and changes to staffing structure within the budgets that we set as elected members. So the only thing that's changing is allowing our effective head of paid service to do what we would allow our head of paid service to do at the county council, or the city council, or a district council that we serve on, within the budgets that we set. I'm suggesting that we add in the word around in consultation with the chair, because you have a responsibility, as Councillor Quigley said, when you are chairing or leading an organisation, to make sure that there is a degree of reflection back to governance. We obviously have group leaders. If there was a significant staffing structure issue, I would be saying to the chief, as I have done previously, this needs to go through group leaders, or actually it needs a wider airing with elected members. I can't really give any more assurance than that to you as chair. My concern about delaying this is it will have an impact. It inevitably will have an impact. We already know that there is pressure on the service. We've had the discussion earlier today. There'll be issues that come up, and we'll have to go through successive committees and then back to fire authority. So actually it's not just an impact over the summer, it's an impact over a number of rounds of meetings. So I'm reluctant to defer this till September unless somebody's saying to me they'd substantively want to change what is is on here, and I don't think I've heard that in the discussion that there has been thus far. Councillor Trimble and then Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I think bringing something like this at a late stage with the changes explained away in the report they are with like HR policies, changes to personal regulations and the wording, you know, it seems a bit raw, it seems a bit as though it's brought kind of last minute, but I think, and at first glance it might look like that, but I think as it's been explained fairly clearly, and it really is, when you go through it, the changes are pretty minimal, and the explanations all seem reasonable and right, and in a sense, the few bits of changes in terms of payments are, even though they're minimal, they're in the right direction. You know, it does seem kind of quite the payments of £250 and things like that seems sort of fairly minimal in terms of that. So it would seem a bit churlish, I think, really, just to hold it off for the sake of that. But I think it's probably something we ought to learn for the future in terms of making sure we get it done in a better and more timely way.
Thank you, Councillor Trimble. I think that's point has been made, and I've certainly apologised on behalf of the authority, and I think that point has been made and has been heard loud and clear. But the other alternative is we take an adjournment now and allow people a chance to have a conversation directly, if groups want to have a conversation directly with the clerk and the chief about any of the substantive issues. But I think the only substantive issue really is the one around the flexibility we're allowing to the chief around establishment and disestablishment of posts within the financial budgets that we set. That's the only substantive change really, and the financial uplifts, which, as I said, I don't think is unusual given they haven't been uplifted for a significant number of years. So as a sort of compromise, I'm happy to call an adjournment if people want to adjourn.
If I've got a compromise for it, possible.
Councillor Lee, yeah.
So the compromise is if we agree this in principle today, it's come forward in principle today, but we ask for it to come forward again at the next meeting, just to give us time to have a look through it properly, because at the end of the day, depending on how quick we might need half an hour, then we might think of something. So if today as a compromise we agree it in principle, but we ask for it to come back at the next meeting just to re-look at it and rediscuss it if possible.
I'm going to 5-minute adjournment.
Yeah, I think it's probably a wise idea. My concern about that is it's a scheme of delegation and its impact on pensions, etc. I'm not sure we've got the legal right.
That's me, 5-minute adjournment just to discuss the
So we'll have a 5-minute adjournment and then we'll reconvene.
Okay. Thank you for that adjournment, and thank you for colleagues. Thank you, Councillor Wheeler, for the conversation and for the feedback in the discussion. So, the way forward that we would suggest, as discussed between myself and Councillor Wheeler, and with the advice of the clerk, to make sure that we're the right side of the law on this and that the authority isn't open to challenge, is that the recommendation 1 stays as is. So to note the update of on the work being undertaken in respect to the constitutional framework and by the independent remuneration panel, and that recommendation 2 is slightly altered to read: to approve the updated and revised scheme of delegation attached as Appendix 1 to this report, comma, and here is the amended text, with a further review of its operation to be brought back to the December meeting of the authority. So we are giving approval. We can't give principal approval because we're giving approval to delegations which have got legal implications, particularly around pensions, etc., and finance. But what we're saying is, rather than in the September meeting, there's an ongoing piece of work around the Constitution by the clerk anyway. We bring this particular element, and there might be other elements at the time, there might be changes in legislation, back to see how it is operating in December. We'll have had a few test cases then around, particularly I would guess the HR issues, and if we feel there are further changes that need to be made, particularly in relation to elected members' views, or elected members want to raise substantive points at that point in the December meeting, then of course that will give the opportunity for elected members to do that. I think it's a sensible way forward for everybody. We give the chief the flexibility he needs for now, but we get an opportunity to recast our eyes over this and make any substantive changes that we need to in December. So I'm going to propose that, and I think that's seconded by Councillor Wheeler. Any comments or questions, Councillor?
Can I just make a point? I'd just like to know when did we actually last review the Constitution?
It's a long time.
This is the point I'm going to make. We should be looking at a regular review of the Constitution, if not on an annual basis, at least biannually, to make sure that it's up to speed and it's doing what it should be doing, and that we're carrying out our governance in line with legislation. To have left it, if I haven't misheard, that the figures in there have been there for 15 years, and I would hope it hasn't been 15 years since we reviewed the whole Constitution. That would be remiss. So with that sort of lesson learned, let's make sure that we in future carry out regular reviews of the Constitution to make sure that we are up to speed and operating within, not just within the law, but within the parameters of good governance.
Yeah, which is precisely the point of this piece of work, Councillor Gleith. That's why it was instigated. Any other comments? No? I'm going to move the recommendation to which is seconded by Councillor Wheeler. All those in favour of the amended recommendations? All those against? Any abstentions? That is agreed unanimously. Thank you, colleagues, for your support and forbearance in relation to that item. The final item then is item 11, which is committee outcomes. And they're on page 99 to 140. I don't think we need to go through item by item, but anybody's got any questions or any of the chairs of committees want to draw attention to anything in particular in relation to those? No? Colleagues happy to read those then? Yeah, they're agreed. Thank you very much. That's the last item on our agenda. Those who want to stay or are able to stay, we have got a Strategic Inclusion Board meeting. Otherwise, this meeting and it is open to all elected members, not just those who are notified as formal members of the meeting. So please do stay. You're welcome, and we will get information circulated to elected members in relation to the Mansfield Command Suite opening. Please be mindful of the opening for the formal opening on the 28th, and obviously you are welcome to attend alongside NFRS at Nottinghamshire Pride. We'll make sure the details are circulated about that, which is Saturday, 30th of July. Councillor Crubbs, is this formal? Any other business? Or?
Yeah, it's just any other business really. On the vetting, so we can actually get in the building, is there any movement on that? Because it is...
Chief?
I suppose the agreement initially was that the chair, vice chair and clerk would do the vetting, and then for other members, if they'd indicated they want to be vetted, because I know there's a difference of opinion across members, but if you're indicating you want vetting, what I would sort of say, given that we are on a joint site with security restrictions from our, one of our partners, it will make your lives a lot easier if you wish to come and go about swiping in and getting access to things. And for those members who want to do that, they can indicate to me and we can start getting that ball rolling.
I do. I want to
we've just to be really clear on this, we specifically agreed as an authority, and we had quite a long discussion about this, you recall, and in group leaders, there's different tiers of vetting for the building, and I think we agreed for chairs and lead members, group leaders, etc., the top level, if you like. The top level is inappropriate, but a certain figure, and then we agreed at authority the next tier down for other elected members if they wish to go through that, but we didn't want to force everybody to, so we probably just need to recirculate that information to elected members.
I was chair of the HR and Professional Standards Committee. I actually had to sign the Official Secrets Act when I was on the police authority, so I've been vetted up to the eyeballs.
Those members, once you've indicated and actually submitted the application, it takes a few weeks. You know, I would imagine the police, given the amount of turnover they've got, new people coming in, there are lots of people they're doing at the same time. So there is quite a lead-in time of a few weeks. But if members want to either let Leanne or myself know about when you wish to be vetted, we can look to try and get that moving for you.
Just say, it seems, apart from the fact that there was some locked doors you couldn't get through unless somebody let you through, it was actually easier to get into this building than it was the fire authority old building, because when you used to go into the fire authority, somebody was on the reception and you signed in and you said you were coming to the fire authority meeting. This morning, apart from somebody letting me through the gate in the car, which they didn't ask who I was, I just said I was here for the fire authority, I drove into the car park and walked into the building, and then somebody let me through the door. So I don't want to set any alarms running, and clearly I've not come and...
I'll share your concern with the Chief Constable, Ken.
But it seemed quite lax, to be honest.
You were very ably assisted this morning by our good esteemed colleagues Lorraine and Leanne, who I think made it seem seamless this morning.
Absolutely.
If they're not here, I have to say, having turned up for meetings with the Chief, it's not as easy, Steve.
Right.
But we were very ably assisted by Leanne and Lorraine. I think you smoothed things this morning. So I think the point is, if we need to be interacting outside of those formal meetings where Leanne and Lorraine or other colleagues are able to be,